Macron's recent statements have sparked chaos in the European region and could even lead to NATO troops entering Ukraine to fight Russia. This behavior raises a lot of troubling questions. It made it necessary for the French departments to come out and say, "We're not going to war." But a Czech politician jumped in and said they were going to war. Why are you guys fighting? America doesn't like it when Europe is united. They prefer it to be chaos. Europe has been making a lot of confusing noises about China lately. Last July, for example, the German media published a story about a severe shortage in the used weapons and ammunition arsenal. The background at the time was that Ukraine claimed that it was going to carry out a major counter-offensive to recover the Crimea. At the time, the entire West was trying to raise the ammunition needed for the Ukrainian counter-offensive to the point of creating a shortage in their own countries. But as things turned out, the Ukrainian side changed their commander-in-chief from Zelensky to Thursky. It's gone from a major counter-offensive to a major retreat, and several major military towns have fallen. And more importantly, there's a lack of ammunition. After many countries refused to directly assist Ukraine with ammunition last year, the EU was smart enough to come up with a solution. Donate its own existing ammunition to Ukraine and then fill its own gap by buying ammunition from other countries in the name of replenishing its own ammunition. This has the advantage of not having to face a shortage of ammunition in one's own country. And at the same time, it avoids involving the country providing the ammunition in the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. This is indeed a very well thought out approach, and many NATO countries have agreed to this program. However, the implementation of this program faced trouble. That is, the stockpile of weapons and ammunition of many European countries is insufficient. French President Emmanuel Macron said last month that we need to face up to shortages of certain components, especially gunpowder, which we need badly right now. This thing is not just the responsibility of NATO members either. Ukrainian President Zelensky, a comedian by trade, squandered freely in the face of aid from various countries in the form of weapons and ammunition, in which case Ukraine needed far more than the upper limit of the EU's military industrial production capacity. Zelensky says NATO once promised Ukraine 1 million rounds of ammunition aid, but now it's not even 30%. This caused NATO members to lose some face, so they put the blame on China, with a report in the French press stating that the cause of the gunpowder shortage in France was linked to Chinese cotton. Breton, a time-honored commissioner within the European Union, said that the culprit for the fact that we in Europe now have no means to provide for our own armed forces and cannot make enough ammunition and shells is China. So why is it China's responsibility? He said that China had come to a sudden halt in the supply of a certain type of cotton that must be used for gunpowder and with which the manufacture of weapons was linked, so it would take some time for the matter to move forward, even if the countries had found a substitute for that cotton. It's almost like you're saying the cause of constipation is that the Earth doesn't have enough gravity. You promised 1 million rounds last year, but the actual supply is less than even 30. So no wonder Zelensky blames you. Now you are blaming China for this. Have you forgotten that you slandered China's Xinjiang cotton? EU guys, NATO guys, have you forgotten the rumors of genocide in this part of China's Xinjiang? Haven't forgotten your suppression of long stable cotton in Xinjiang, have you? These are the things you guys did up. This is not the behavior of a responsible government official. And what does cotton have to do with dynamite? This cotton refers specifically to nitrocellulose, which is used as a fuse and primer for artillery shells because it burns extremely fast and can produce high temperatures and pressures. But that doesn't excuse you from putting the blame on China. Firstly, China exports very little nitrocellulose to the EU in the first place, and according to the 2020 figures, exports to France only accounted for about 8 of exports. Therefore, their import problems in the field of nitrocellulose had very little to do with China. Secondly, as early as last year, there was news of a huge gap in the used raw materials for gunpowder, whereas according to EU officials, trade with China was normal a few months ago. Therefore, the current precipitous decline in ammunition production capacity has nothing to do with China. After solving the cotton problem from China, we in the EU will increase production and can produce 5 to 1. 7 million rounds of ammunition by the end of the year, EU officials said. It was followed by a note that infuriated Zelensky, but that output is still below Russia's production capacity. This means that in wanting Ukraine to be able to hold Russia's level of firepower, you have to get the US involved. The EU puts all the blame on the outside world. First, he accuses Zelensky of wasting weapons and ammunition. Secondly, he blamed China for not supplying sufficient nitrocellulose, thus halting production. Thirdly, even if production resumed, there was still a gap between production capacity and that of Russia, and assistance from the United States was needed. These actions of the EU are a sign of extreme irresponsibility, so it can be seen that the EU does not actually care about the situation in Ukraine. In addition, the EU's approach is intended to stigmatize China, trying to distort China's cotton exports to the EU as China's assistance to Ukraine in terms of arms and ammunition. China's cotton exports to the EU were never meant for you to produce weapons and ammunition, and were never meant to aid Ukraine. It can thus be seen that in order to shirk their responsibilities and gain votes, some politicians in Europe have often planted, insulted, and slandered China, and this is the consensus of all politicians. Europe nowadays no longer sees good politicians like Montgomery and de Gaulle. And nowadays politicians are very young and subjugated to the influence of the United States, so we should also understand their situation and practices. I'm a citizen of Beijing, China. 新闻点，对吧？